As promised, as we were beginning the show right here on the Daily Report, TV 47, as is the norm every Tuesday, we bring you the People's Court. And tonight, we discuss a matter that is not only pertinent, but also very important for you to listen to, and that is the revenue share stalemate. And tonight, we have some experts to be able to debunk this. And as always, I'm not alone on this show. Victor Muyakane is on the other side of this wonderful table. Linda Alela is taking a short break tonight, but of course, she is following this discussion as we invite you to chime in at TV 47 News, at Muyakane, at George Maringa _ at Linda _ Alela. We shall be happy to sample your feedback. Our SMS lines are also open. Equally is our WhatsApp line. And Victor, I want to hand it over to you to be able to tell our viewers whom we have tonight.
Right. Now, those of you who are joining us right now, this is the People's Court tonight. Karibuni sana. Now, let's introduce those who are not here physically. We have Mheshimiwa Reuben Kigame, who's joining us from Eldoret, I believe, the headquarters of his political operations, as well as his media empire. Karibu sana, Mr. Kigame. I hope you're doing well. Karibu sana. I can see your library is looking very well stocked. I hope you've read most of the books in your library. Karibu sana. Now, to my immediate right, we have Mr. Kiruga Thuku, who's the MCA for, is it Shinga or Chinga? Chinga Ward. This man wears many hats. He's also an NEC member. He's also the chair of the UDA MCA's caucus. He's a very important man. Karibu sana.
Asante.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
Next to him, we have Madam Harriet Mboshe. She's actually a council member of the Law Society of Kenya, but is gunning for the position of president of the very same organization. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much for having me.
We wish you all the best.
Asante.
And finally, but not least, we have Mr. John Kinuthia, Senior Programs Officer at the IBPK. Very serious people. Looking at budgets and whatnot, very serious people. And all of these people are here to help us understand this very serious conversation. First of all, George, I mean, we have a stalemate here.
Yeah.
Does anyone wish, let's start with you. Break it down, talk to us about why do we actually have a stalemate? What happened? Why didn't the people that were tasked to have a conversation agree? Because just to remind our audiences, there was an IBEC meeting, I believe the 22nd IBEC, which is a big meeting that decides what happens in our counties and everywhere. And it was agreed that the COG, the Council of Governors, the CRA, and who else was the third? And National Treasury was supposed to come together and be able to talk this out. Why do we still have a stalemate?
I think, and let me first start with greeting the viewers. Thank you very much for this invitation. I think this, just like the president said earlier in the day, today, it all has to do with even government ministries. At times, they are serving the same government, but at times, they have their differences. You know, because in politics, you differ even with your own brother or sister.
Right.
Yeah. So, I don't think it's much of a crisis. And eventually, I think and I believe we shall have a settlement because, luckily, we have the goodwill from the highest office in the land, the office of the president and his deputy. They really support devolution. And I think what we need is just to relax. These things will work out. And
okay, you're clearly very hopeful.
Of course they will, because you know the good thing is we have a very committed government. And in fact, the one reason why we are supporting the governors is because now we also expect them to, because we have, as MCAs, we've been talking of devolution, you know, we have devolution. We want resources also to be devolved in the same manner. And the ward level should be the lowest, you know, devolution should go
all the way up to there.
Up to the wards.
Now, we will come back. We'll come back, and you actually lead the UDA MCA's caucus, and we'll talk about some of those nitty-gritties. But Madam Boshe, I want you to just jump in here a little bit from where you said, why do we still have a stalemate? And this is not the first time we have a stalemate.
I'll start by saying it's important for purposes of context to appreciate that on one hand, we have, and it's important for me even as I vie for the presidency of the Law Society of Kenya, and one of the things I'm insisting on is independence of institutions. We have the Commission on Revenue Allocation that has its mandate in terms of making the recommendations. And you see, by the time they're making certain recommendations, they have taken into account statistics. So we need to understand and appreciate that independence of that particular institution, and to expect that then they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. There is also the recognition of the roles, for instance, that the COG has, and it's a valid creature. It's a caucus that then intends and has certain obligations. So for them also to be agitating for, or to be making certain asks in terms of funds is also not necessarily, it's not at all out of their scope or out of their mandate. So we have the independence of the CRA, and then we also have the recognition of the roles that each one of these people will play, including the Treasury, with the visibility of the figures. Having then said that, it's important also to say that it's not unusual for us to find ourselves in this situation. Why? Because the Constitution gives a minimum cap of 15%. It doesn't go beyond that. Then that mandate is now given to the CRA to make certain recommendations, and then Senate has a role in terms of that as well. And it's not necessarily that Senate will absolutely adopt the recommendations of CRA. They can make specific recommendations in terms of, they can make specific amendments. So this situation that we are finding ourselves in, it may not, one, as I've said, be unusual, but then it is important that we also recognize that one of the concerns that have also been coming from counties, and I'm surprised that it wasn't part of what formed the statements from the chair of the COG, it is important that money is also trickled down at the right pace. Because, you know, even if you're given billions right now, you're told, you know, we give you the promise of billions, and the billions show up late. By that time, you've already, and many counties will confirm, that they most of the times run on loans. So you find that by the time that money is coming in, it's going down the drain as well, you know, as a matter of speech. So I had expected that they were also going to talk about the timelines within which the resources are you know, disbursed.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's
but
certainly something we can circle back on.
Yeah,
Let
certainly.
me actually make a note of that. And then what about you, John? From where you said, why do we still have a stalemate? You probably might have a different perspective.
Thanks, Victor. I think it's good for us to appreciate that this is not the first year when we are having a discussion about how we share revenue between the national government and the county governments. I think going back all the way to the very first year of devolution, right, we've had what we are referring to as stalemates. But I want to try and characterize it slightly differently. And to say, if you look at what the law requires of the institutions that are involved in this discussion, right? So the Commission on Revenue Allocation is supposed to prepare a set of recommendations on how the sharing of revenue will happen, you know, by January 1st. So basically 6 months before we start the implementation of the next budget. Then the law goes ahead and says, at the same time, and this is the Public Finance Management Act, that the National Treasury will also present a set of recommendations about the same set of conversation on how much money should remain at the national level and how much should go to county governments. Now, I want to hone in on the word recommendations, because the expectation is that at the end of the day, the National Assembly and the Senate, as both houses of parliament, will actually have the final say on how much money is actually approved. So you have the technocrats preparing recommendations, and then you have the politicians making the final decision. But the reason why I want to characterize it slightly differently is because this is part and parcel of the democratization of the budgeting process that came with the new constitution. So the discussion, because if you think about when the Treasury is supposed to present its recommendations, is actually last week, by February 15th. They're supposed to table the budget policy statement, the division of revenue, bill as well. Right? So we are still in the period when we are actually supposed to be having this haggle.
Push and pull.
Push and pull. But it's really not just a bad discussion. It's really supposed to be a discussion about what priorities are we pursuing as a country, which level of government is responsible for what, functions of those priorities that need to be implemented. Then we arrive at a figure. So the challenge I have often with this conversation and these stalemates is they are often reduced to a mathematical exercise. But if you look at all the underpinnings of the law about this conversation, it's actually a very democratic process of having a discussion, and Honorable Thuku started touching on it, in terms of thinking about so what is the current economic situation? What is it that we need to think about? What challenges are we trying to solve through service delivery? And then we come to the question of, so how much money is needed in that space, and then which level of government then gets what? So I would say, the setup of the IBEC, the Intergovernmental Budget and Economic Council, is supposed still to be a space where these recommendations are discussed, right? So if they don't agree, at the end of the day, both houses of parliament have to make a decision. And the cool thing about it is that they can make those decisions with or without amendments. So it means they consider the recommendations, they listen. If you look at the National Assembly, they've called for input on the budget policy statement, which has elements of the division of revenue as well. So they need to consider all these voices, the technocrats from CRA, the technocrats from the National Treasury, then make a decision. So the reason why I said I'll characterize it differently is to look at it as the democratic fabric of budgeting that moved away from a central government that made decisions and everyone just had to go with that. So it's a good thing for our democracy.
It's a good thing.
Yep.
All right. We'll, again, we will circle back to that. Are stalemates actually a good thing? And what's the impact of this continued push and pull? I mean, are there any downstream concerns as a result of all this, George?
Yeah. I'm curious, Mheshimiwa, when you look at this stalemate, because these monies that are supposed to be shared between the national government and the county governments trickle down to the counties, and of course county assemblies, of which you're a member of course, debate on this. Do you think that there needs to be a change? Is it time that this country rethinks how the conversation about the delayed disbursement occasioned by such stalemates can, continue to persist, and, looking at the whole perspective of delivering services to Mwananchi? Because over time, we have never had a situation where these monies have been distributed in good time. Why don't we seem to be catching up with what we agreed as a country in August of 2010 that we shall be able to follow?
I want to believe because the UDA Kenya Kwanza government seems to be the most committed government, in the multi-party democracy. I think, and I don't know whether you have noted, this government is trying to build on the legacy of Mzee Mwai Kibaki. We are very much, and you see the president, the deputy president, and everyone in this government, there is that trajectory. Of course, our detractors will tell you otherwise, but I can tell you for sure that is the route we are following. So, always when there is a discussion, because I don't want to see whatever you are saying as a stalemate in bad light. Like my brother, Kenodi, I would say, it's good because when people are discussing, you are able to put in the right parameters, you are able to put in suggestions on what exactly should be done. And, now this is my second time as a member of County Assembly.
Yes.
And, our county governments, apart from the salaries they pay to workers, the major reason why devolution came was so that devolution or development can come close to the people at the grassroots areas. And for example, I'm very, very happy with my governor. Of course, there are those who say we should never speak positively about our governance, but I'm very happy with my governor, His Excellency Mutahi Kahiga, because what he has done is that this money that comes to the county of Nyeri, we sat with him, we agreed every ward will be receiving a certain amount. And by the way, Nyeri is one of the case studies we are using to say, look, Nyeri is one of the most developed counties using this money is allocated by the government.
Sort of ward fund?
Yes, sort of ward fund.
Okay.
We are using the example of Nyeri to say, yes, monies should be devolved in every ward in Kenya. And I must say, I'm very proud of my colleague MCAs, the crop of leaders we have as MCAs today, both in government and in opposition. We are united in that. And luckily, the top leadership of this country, led by the president himself, supports, this trickling of money all the way to the ward level, because it must be understood, this money doesn't belong to MCAs. This money belongs to the people we represent, because you go and bring, projects. So in as far as we are saying, let money trickle down to the counties for development to be realized, in the grassroots areas,
yes,
we are totally in support. So, I repeat, I don't think there is a crisis. No, it is just in politics. If you want to push a bit, everyone wants, want to be seen doing this and that, you see? But the basic and the bottom line is, as long as we are talking about grassroots development, the governors have a right, yes, to request for these monies. But then again, the money that should go to the wards, as the MCAs have been requesting, it should be institutionalized in our rules, because we still have some areas where if you are not in good books with the governor, you don't get development money, which is a anarchic way of doing things. And therefore, that's why I'm saying we need rules that will guarantee every MCA in the Republic, notwithstanding the party they belong to, will be receiving ward development fund. Then the people at the grassroots will be able to identify the projects they want done. So therefore, I support the debate.
Okay.
But then again, it should come with the right rules to ensure that money goes to the people down there.
Okay.
Without, such things that we have seen, like the governors. Sometimes they want to fight the MCAs whom they believe are not in their corner. That's not good. Thank you.
Okay. Harriet, let's look at this, with legal lenses. Whereas there has been the recommendation that a certain percentage is what should go to development, we still see that counties, fine, let's even assume we resolved this stalemate of the shareable revenue. But again, when we go to implementation, we still see that the expenditure goes mostly into paying salaries more than development. Would we still be doing this in the right way?
In fact, when you look at the CRA and its mandate, one of the things it has also been doing is to also recommend to the counties in terms of the management of their resources.
Yes.
So the question of recurrent expenditure, and here it's important again because we're having a national conversation that we confirm, or that we are not beating about the bush on the fact that recurrent expenditure is a concern, not just with respect to the county governments, but also with respect to the national government.
Yes.
And yes, CRA, and that's why again, even as said, as a law society, it's important for us that we are talking about the question of independence of institutions, that then we are able to say, what, we have these institutions that then are recommending, and their recommendations, because it's a constitutional institution. So we need to respect that and ask ourselves, how do we borrow from them? But I'd just like to say something about what Heshmia here has said. The question, and because this is national TV, so it's important that we're having honest conversations. The question of having a government that is committed to devolution, or to the question, it's important that as a country, we move away from worshipping leadership. We need to worship, we need to embrace the constitution that we have. So that having institutions that respect devolution, nobody, one individual gave us this constitution that talks about devolution. It is a document that Kenyans voted for. And the president, when they're taking oath, they swear and they take oath to abide by the constitution.
And to defend it.
So it is not a privilege for government or for the executive to then comply with the requirements in terms of devolution. But then, of course, there's a question of whether or not they are complying in the first place.
Okay.
Because Hesh again will confirm that many counties have a problem in terms of, and that's why I mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation, the point at which the money is disbursed, right? So then by the time sometimes the money is being disbursed, it has already been, debt and expenditure has already been incurred against that particular resource. So that then it is not able to work very well. Again, from a legal lens, the question of recommendation on allocation of funds towards, that's an important conversation to have, and it has actually been had before. When you look at the BBI recommendations, for instance, you will find that there were specific recommendations to institutionalize that kind of arrangement. So in the interim, what is part of the creativity to go around it, which is not necessarily anchored in the constitution, is where you found counties ending up with the word development funds. So it is, it's just part of those interim measures, not necessarily anchored within the constitution, but the conversation on making sure that it is entrenched was actually there when there was a conversation about BBI, and it was going to be very systematic. So that then, as Mahesh is saying, you do not have tokenism, even in terms of allocation of wards to specific wards.
Wards, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we allowed to give points of information? You know, I wish to inform the learned council. It's not that, I'm not, what we are seeing here, it's not that...
She says worshipping.
Yeah, and I noted that word. I didn't want to repeat it, but she wanted to imply like I'm worshipping the government or something like that. When you sit in the party's neck, we are, as neck, as much as I'm bringing...
National Executive Committee.
National Executive Committee. As much as I'm bringing in those things to do with colleague MCAs and counties, you also become part of tracking the implementation of the things or what the party constitution, dictates or should be done by the government, should do in an election. Therefore, when things work out, I campaigned for the president. We went out there. Even today, we still support, the positive things towards our people. So when things are working out, what am I expected to do? To say they are not working out? No. When SHIF works out, it's helpful to Kenyans. What am I supposed to do? I have to support. And so, I'm part of the collective, team in UDA, supporting our president, supporting our party to deliver on our campaign promises.
Brilliant.
So, my sister here should know I have no otherwise. I'm not worshipping anyone.
He's doing his job. That is what he's telling us. He's doing his job. And again, as someone who respects institutions, I respect that he's doing his job. But again, the reality is that we're having the conversation here today that there is a discrepancy in terms of what the governors are asking for, in terms of what
She should even be very soft on me because I'm supporting her candidature.
Guys, I mean, what do you expect when you have politicians? And John, you are saving grace here.
Yeah, saving grace.
And I hope you haven't got any political ambitions.
I can see a comment. I was trying to see a comment here about, the Gen Z would tell you the math is not mathing. So I'd like us to, when we come back from this short commercial break, to pick your mind about how then counties can stop relying so much on this additional, or rather the shareable revenue. So then the taxes and everything, the conversation on the levies, I'll still fetch that comment. But keep your feedback coming. The conversation is getting spicy right here in studio. Right. We still have more on the other side of the break, including our guest who will be joining us virtually, Mheshimiwa, rather former presidential aspirant Reuben Kigame. Do stay with us. We're back in a few minutes.
Na safari hii katika Mfahamu Kiongozi tutakuletea viongozi aina mbalimbali.
Nikuwe na Nisani kama 10 na pia nikuwe menua minibus. Minibus niko niwa.
Kushinda unaangalia simu ya mzee. Soma Biblia ama ingia kwa washroom ujisugue mpaka nimetoa hivi.
I don't know whether any of my children would want to get into the political field. Sijajua bado.
Kila Alhamisi saa 1:30 kuendelea.
Join us on a journey through the concrete jungles and rising skylines, where every beam, every nail tells a story of progress and vision.
In every aspect of life, you have to look at several dynamics.
From groundbreaking.
Nowadays with the tech, you can check on different websites or you check online.
You're watching The People's Court right here on TV 47, the home of untold stories, with me, George Marenge, and of course, my colleague, Victor Miakana. Before we proceeded to the break, John Kinuthia, as I told you that comment about the math is not mathing from the Gen Z, as they would call it. So whereas there is that stalemate on the shareable revenue, counties, of course, are envisioned to be sort of interdependent, whereas also independent on their own, to be able to come up with innovative ways. Is it too much of an ask for counties to be creative, and are they even creative enough? Did we bite more than we could chew in the Constitution?
So this has been a conversation since 2013.
Yes.
On whether over time counties should become more dependent on their own revenue, what we commonly refer to as on-source revenue, in a sense to reduce their dependence on intergovernmental transfers. And I think there's a case to be made that definitely we should be seeing more effort in terms of what counties are trying to raise. But it's good for us to take a contextual analysis of it as well, in the sense of looking at the architecture of our devolution.
Vertical ground.
Right? So if you look at the architecture of Kenya's devolution, and I'll compare it to a couple of countries where it's done slightly differently, but it's the same model, is that in Kenya we decided that we needed to devolve services. So right, if you go to Schedule 4 of the Constitution, there's a whole list, and there are 14 of them that we give to counties. But if you go to the revenue side, we actually did not devolve our revenue raising arrangement, right?
Yes.
So whether it's income tax, whether it's VAT, we kept that as a central aspect of function, which was left at the national level. But then is the reason why a formula exists to be able to distribute that national revenue. Whatever counties collect today is what the former local authorities used to collect. So there was an anticipation then that our devolution was going to focus on service delivery at the lowest level, but we'll still collect revenue nationally and then use a mechanism that was equitable to be able then to distribute resources to the 47 counties. So when you think about this goal again that we are speaking at the beginning of should counties over time raise more revenue to probably that is not even the objective of how things are organized. That's not to say that there are not some counties that can do it. If you look at all the revenue that is collected by our 47 counties, Nairobi alone collects almost a third of it. Right? So Nairobi definitely has quite a huge set of sources to collect revenue from. You compare it to Tana River and the picture is very different. Right? So our architecture of devolution actually did not necessarily hand revenue sources to counties. And think of countries like India. If you look at India, there are certain income taxes that are collected by the states. Right? Which means that those states then have a case to be made that they should be able to collect more to be able to take care of their budgets. In Kenya, we never did that. So there's always a common joke we make in our office about counties, and there's always this push of counties should do more to build businesses so that they can collect more revenue. But if you think about it, what revenue are they collecting from businesses? It's single business licenses. If in Nyeri, they do very well business-wise, right? They employ more people. Where does the pay go? It's collected by KRA. Yeah. If the businesses there are doing really well and there's more VAT being collected from those businesses, we collect that through KRA at the national level. If the people in Nyeri are so rich and now they are spending more money on luxurious goods, excise duty, where it does that is collected nationally. So in terms of the architecture of it, I will be more conservative to say that counties will get to a place where one day they stop being dependent on these intergovernmental transfers, because we never really devolved the aspect of revenue collection, but we devolved the services side. So it's something good for us to keep in the conversations. But as we look at different counties, the mathematics might look quite different, because counties like Nairobi do collect more. But of those 47 counties, as I was saying, about 10 of them collect almost 75% of all the revenue collected by counties.
In the whole country.
Then the other 37 collect a very small amount. So in a sense, it's also kind of drawn from how we decided to devolve.
Right. So to that, there are two questions. Okay. One is, and I just want to throw both of them onto the table, and I would like all of you here to be able to look at that. So is there a formula that can look after everybody equitably? Is there a formula that can look after, because I mean, some other people make more than the others. I believe there's an existing conversation around even our own personal counties at home. Your partner and yourself, you make $1 million, you make 10,000. Yeah. Who should have say in terms of that? So is there a formula that actually serves everybody equitably? But there's a comparison that's been made to the three different proposals by the people that are talking, the CRA, the COG, and of course the National Treasury. Yes. So Treasury proposed 391 billion to the counties. The CRA proposed 398 billion, 0.14 if I may be specific. I mean, we have money people here. And then the COG wants something to the tune of around 450 billion. That's 439, and then about 10 for road maintenance levy fund. Yeah. Now, this particular breakdown has been compared to the writings of King Solomon. So on the one hand, you have there's Songs of Solomon, which are considered to be hopeful. We have Proverbs that are practical, and then we have Ecclesiastes that are about reality. So which of these three proposals is hopeful, is practical, and takes note of reality? Gentleman and lady, take it away.
Now, I think from a personal perspective, I would go with the governor's proposal.
450B?
Yes.
Tell me why.
The reason is, you see, and to their credit, the governors are even suggesting about a kitty to go directly to maintaining roads. You're always there when it rains. We have very bad roads. Some you had even done them like last year or 2 years ago. They are bad again. And my supporting them also comes with rider, because you have mentioned about the best formula of working out these things. It's a high time because earlier on you are even talking about time frame of doing these things. One of the fairest ways of sharing development money in this country is using, the word-based formula, whereby we establish a ward fund. The MCA and the, local leaders there in their wards, they sit down, like we've been doing in Nyeri, and they come up with the projects they want to implement. You see, this money does not come in terms, as cash. No. You identify projects, they are done. This is, this money, when it goes, we say it is World Development Fund, it's not going to pay anyone or anything like that. We are certain, we are sure this is development money. So that is where to start. So, I've said I support the governors should get that money, but then again, with it should come that law that from this date, we have World Development Fund as a law. And we were even suggesting, when the CDF discussion was going on in the Senate, they should come together.
Should also include.
Yes. And luckily again, and I hope my sister here does not say I'm worshiping anyone, there is the issue of independence of the county assemblies. Again, luckily, His Excellency the President has pronounced himself on the matter, and he fully supports independence of the assemblies. Now, what we need is a timeline that from such and such a date, this independence will be being felt in the assemblies. Because what happens, if the governors get like the 450B, right? And we don't have ward fund, we don't have autonomy of the assemblies, and then you are oversighting them because one of our major duties is to oversight the county governments. Then you want to know, where is this 450 billion going? Our share, how is it going? In some counties, there are those who will look at the oversight of MCs in a very bad manner. They think they are being challenged, you see? And they act really tough on MCs, which is unacceptable. Therefore, that's my take. Let's have the 450B, but then again, let's have timelines indicating when is World Fund becoming operational, when is the autonomy of the assemblies kicking
Independence.
in. Yes, because, so that we are sure. Okay. With the World Fund,
fair
you are certain the wards, there is development in the wards.
Fair enough.
Thank
fair
you.
enough. And that brings about another conversation around oversight of all of that. Who wants to go? Harriet, where do you stand?
Well,
or sit, for that matter.
Yeah.
I hope I have not offended.
No, you're safe. You're safe right now. For now,
if you are suit.
We're not worshipping now. We're about the money.
Now we are about the money.
Right.
And I'd like to say that, one, I'd rather think it's fairly dismissive when we want to say that, I would want to imagine that Treasury, as at the time it was coming up with the 391, it was based on something. I would want to imagine that CRA, by the time it was coming up with 398, it was based on something. I would want to imagine that the COG, by the time it was coming up with the 450B, it was based on something. That said, one of the things that I expect their figures are based on, for instance, the COG. I mean, if they were to just have a nominal amount, what would, and services are not at 100% even within the counties, what kind of explanation will they give to their people? So they have a duty to ask for as much as they can get because of the need to realize the duty and the mandate of the counties under Schedule 4 of the Constitution. So I'd like to say then in that regard, and you've seen consistently for many years, CRA has tried to be the middleman here. Treasury has tried to, to keep as much as it can to the national government, understanding why, again, because, the CS, Treasury is national, isn't it? Yes. So even though the issue of this kind of allocation affects the counties directly, he who pays the piper calls the tune, ain't it? So it's important that we're able then to appreciate that. The question that we find increasingly happening, and I do recall you had asked about it, George, is the question of how much the counties are then having to collect, and then the money going to the national government and leaving very little. Because, and I think one of my colleagues here has mentioned the fact that you find there's a disparity in terms of how much is collected across the counties. So that sometimes you find that there's certain counties where people are told to tighten their belt much harder than others. And then, of course, even when you look at the Constitution, there's the question of the equalization fund after all is said and done, regardless of the collection that then you have made. So we need to get to that point even as a country where, and I do remember again, because you see the thing about being a citizen of a country is that this country is ours. And we must therefore make sure that at all costs, we are not regressing from the gains that we have made even in our own constitution. We must ask ourselves, how do we make devolution work? The question, for instance, that is also raised in the statement about the roads. We find in the fourth schedule again, provision 5A, the question of the county roads. So yes, even here in Nairobi, for those who perhaps live in Nairobi, you will see that we have so many potholes on so many roads, and many of these roads are county roads. So where do we look to for that kind of development? And yet we know that where the road infrastructure is not working, the production is also affected. So there are those questions, and I'd like to say that it's important that we are more objective than I think we currently are, even across the three institutions. It's important that then we get to that point where it's not looking like one is trying to steal a match on the other. And if we're able then to get to that point where it's about growing and moving our country forward, then we could potentially see a situation whereby Treasury could potentially tell the COG, you know what, we may not necessarily be able to give you the 450 that you're asking for, but what we could do is make sure that even if it's this 398 that CRA, because you'll see CRA has traditionally gone to a middle ground. So even where we may not be able to give you the 450 you're asking for, we will release this little that we are giving you in good time. So that then you're able, and even the MCAs will be happy to hear that, because then they will know that come a certain period of time, then this money is going to be dispersed, and it is going to be dispersed with certainty. So then you know how to, even if it's to truncate expenditure, then that it's able to, because it's more consistent. Right now, even some of the monies that had been foretold has not yet come through.
Actually, just before we proceed, I'm curious about something on a point you've made, and before we proceed as well. Why do you think this objectivity is lacking? Why do you think we are sort of sticking to our guns? And therefore, I mean, yes, we did say, both of you did say a stalemate is a sign of a healthy democracy. But don't you think that the very situation you're describing could be sorted out with precisely the solution of better objectivity? Why don't we have it?
I'm actually hoping that it's going to happen. I'm hoping that because, as I've said, the expectation is that, COG is not entitled. That's why we have the CRA that makes the recommendations. And then we have the role of Senate in terms of the allocation. So it is not that, it's not a must that what COG is asking for, it should be given. Even the Constitution itself does not envisage such a scenario. It envisages a scenario where what they're asking for is measured vis-a-vis what is available and vis-a-vis other parameters. And that is why we have a commission on revenue allocation. All right? So that then it is not arbitrary. Neither is it discretionary. There is supposed to be a formula and a structure, and that is the work of the CRA, and that is why you will find consistently it hasn't necessarily ever, I haven't seen a situation where they have agreed entirely with the COG or with Treasury. It usually more or less. And even though the Constitution, and we've also seen situations, even with the former regime, where they have given more where Treasury has given more than what had been recommended by CRA. The problem that we are finding is a question of perhaps the alignment, just a misalignment, but it's not necessarily, it's not a situation that is necessarily expected or to escalate. It is something that can be properly managed. And one of the ways it can be managed, one is by understanding the role of CRA, understanding the role of Senate, and perhaps also the government, the national government can try and incentivize the COG so that it's not, like I said, it's our country for all of us.
All of us.
It shouldn't be that we have a win-lose situation. Right. It should be such a way that even the counties themselves are able to feel, you know what, we are not being treated unfairly.
Harriet, quick one. Just again, John, I know it's been a while, and George, I know you need to take over. Quick one, as quick as you can. Should we see another, I wouldn't call it a handshake, but let's say another facilitation, another mediation, sort of like what has happened between the judiciary and the executive, which I know your people had a lot to say about. Should we see something like that between the CRA, the COG, and the Treasury to try and reach the place of objectivity, that ideal objectivity that you say?
I'll start by saying that the question of the judiciary and the executive, it was a question of independence of institutions, right, whereby, again, there is a constitutional mechanism under Article 168. If you're offended by a judge, this is how you go about it if there are questions of corruption. Right. Equally, Victor, in this case, we have the Constitution again that tells us when it comes to the question of revenue allocation to counties, we have CRA that makes recommendations. All right? The recommendations are not based on air. They are supposed to be factual. They are supposed to be anchored on statistics and other parameters, including your fiscal discipline, even for the various counties, right?
There's a big issue of pending debt around.
Exactly. So when you look at that, then it's a conversation is good to have so that people are also able to express their, where now you may have a problem is where, for instance, I think today, the office of the cabinet, chief cabinet minister said something about, saying something about that these are expectations that need to be managed. Those kind of statements are the ones that are disrespectful to institutions, all right? And you see when those kinds of, that language starts being used, then it means that we are not respecting institutions. As to whether or not conversations can be had around the expectation and all that, I've even seen, and more often than not, you find CRA even walking around counties, especially when they're looking to allocate the equalization fund. So it's not based on quicksand, it's based on statistics. Nevertheless, Victor, before I hand back to you, statements like those ones of that, governors are not children to be managed in such a manner. They have a constitutional mandate. So it's important that even the executive is able to respect that. And when they're going into these conversations, they go into the conversations with respect, because it is important that the conversations are had. So that then we say, fine, it is untenable. Because you see also the Senate itself is constituted of people who have been elected. And you find sometimes government may have a majority so even in terms of the ability to pass, you will still find the executive's hand in there. But it's important, as I said, that it's not a win-lose situation. Let the governors feel that their grievances are being taken into account.
And responsibly so. John, finally, it's your time to shine.
And he's been taking quite some notes.
And George as well.
No, it's nice. I learn also a lot from colleagues. I think, the question of whether there is a formula that satisfies everyone, I think is an interesting one, because you're basically coming at it from the point of how do we make sure that every level of government and every actor that is involved in that process can feel there is value in terms of the decisions that are being made. And I think it's good for us to qualify. First of all, the reason why we have this conversation every year, the reason why we have a division of revenue conversation every year is because every year we are thinking and rethinking our priorities and looking at where to place our resources. And that's why I said at the beginning, this conversation is not supposed just to be a mathematical one. It's actually supposed to be a conversation about what are those priorities that we want to pursue in a particular year, and what resources need to be put in one pockets, which then means the functions, and then which level of government is running with those functions. It's important to put a nuance here, that the national government does not give money to counties. That changed. What we have today is a system of governance that is decentralized, which means we collect money. Then the first step of that process is we decide how much money will go to each level of government, right? And so it's in that space then you're thinking of, so there are actors, there are processes, how do we make sure that everybody can feel, first of all, there's a fair process through which that decision is being made. And that's why we are speaking about, one agency is giving, an independent office actually, is giving these recommendations, the National Treasury is playing some role, and all of us are going through a process in the Senate. So first of all, I think the first win for everyone should be that everybody feels that there's a fair process in terms of arriving at how much resources should go to each level of government. But one of the things that has been an interesting discussion over the years has been how predictable the resources that go to counties are. Kenya is one of those countries that prepare what we call a medium-term expenditure. Sorry, the budget under something we call a medium-term expenditure framework, which basically says, yes, you are thinking about this year, but it's good also to have an idea of what the 2 outer years will look like, right? And counties also prepare their own budgets. And something really interesting happened sometime around 2015, 2016. The National Treasury and the Commission on Revenue Allocation actually agreed that there's going to be a growth factor that will be applied on how much money counties will get the year next and the year after that. And they said, we'll look at the revenue growth, we'll do an average of 3 years, and then that will give counties an idea that as I'm preparing my budget this year, I also have an idea about how much money I might get next year. Because remember also when counties are implementing their budget, not everything gets done in 1 year. As the Honorable Member will tell you, Honorable Thuku will tell you, there are certain projects that are implemented over a period of 2-3 years. So that was the value of that conversation. But it happened in 1 year. The next year, they didn't agree on whether that should remain. And in that particular year, they went for inflation, right? So what I want to build on, which is what Harriet was saying, is really coming to a conversation where all these actors are playing a role that is supposed to create a process that is fair in terms of what we arrive at. It might not be that everybody gets what they want, but everybody should be agreeable to the decision that is made, so that at the end of the day, everybody, all these government agencies have a feeling that the decision that was made was a fair one. We might not have gotten everything we wanted, but at least we feel that we were heard and what we were arguing for came into play. And really to appreciate also something that the agencies have also been doing. If you follow, the Commission on Revenue Allocation on Twitter and on their social media, you'll notice in the last couple of months, they've actually been having meetings with some of these agencies. They had a meeting with the National Treasury before they actually put out their recommendation. So I think there's something to build on, but it doesn't always play out like that. And this is also connected to the to the aspect of, okay, fine, we agree on the money. Does the money arrive on time? If the money doesn't arrive on time, so then what happens in that process? And I think it's good for us to remember that, this whole disbursement challenge that comes even after we agree on the money is not, again, just because, of course, the National Treasury does get flack for it. Are you sending the money on time?
True.
But it's good for us to remember the Senate, when they are approving the division of revenue processes, especially the County Allocation of Revenue Act. In the annex, there's usually a schedule of when the money will go to the counties, which is also approved by the Senate. And that schedule speaks about how much money will go to each county across all the 12 months, every month. So if that doesn't happen, then we have to ask the question of, so what is the Senate doing about it? So there's that side of it. And the National Treasury, of course, has its part to explain why the money doesn't come on time. Right. But when we flip it, the counties also have a responsibility on the disbursement. They are not free of charge. They're not free of some guilt.
They're not free here.
Because they also have a role to play. You need to have your budget approved on time, because when you go to the controller of budget that approves the disbursements, you have to go with an approved budget. So when MCAs and governors don't agree on the budget and they don't approve it by June 30th and there is a delay, it automatically means there will be a delay when they get their money. So there's a lot of interplay in terms of all these actors.
John, if I hear correctly, as George wants to jump in, we should all clean our rooms and let's meet in the sitting room. All right.
But there is an aspect I wanted to bring in. Because going by this conversation, you know, governors are, we can say they are politicians. They are people's leaders. And they get their mandate directly from the people. Same as members of county assemblies, same as the president. When you hear all the governors coming together and they are saying, no, these monies should be pegged at this. Remember, we have second-time governors. Also, the governors who have come in, most of them are experienced in leadership, you know, leadership issues. So, you must realize that what the governors are requesting for is informed by the reality on the ground. So I don't want to pour cold water on the other, you know, institutions. But you see, for example, between me and Harriet, I'll tell you more convincingly and practically what happens in the village more than Harriet, my sister here. Because Harriet wakes up, goes to the courts, evening, maybe goes to Mugidi before going home.
But how
personally,
do you know?
No, I'm just...
But how do you know where I go?
You go to the village.
Victor,
I wake up.
You know this is a matter of national security.
Your point is you go to the village.
I'm in the village.
This is a matter of national security.
Yeah.
Is he telling the country that
you want to find
the
Harriet,
government is monitoring my movement?
I was giving
Is he telling the country that the government is monitoring my
I think
movement?
the real victim of this tussle is Mugithi. Please proceed.
So my point was, the reality on the ground might be different from what the body is operating here from Nairobi thinks about it.
Right.
And that is why His Excellency the President, earlier today, when he met the governors, he was quick to assure them that, yes, personally, and as a government, we are going to protect devolution. Because, of course, he understands where the governors are coming from. And that is why he said, you know, at times in politics, even he gave the example of even the ministries, you know, colliding because these things should be done this way, these things, they should be done this way. And that's why I said, with the goodwill that has been exhibited by this government and the president and the deputy president, we have no reason to worry. In fact, nobody has mentioned, since devolution came, this government has been related very highly in terms of disbursement to the counties.
Okay.
When it is a day for that, we will come with the statistics and rate the different
No.
We've had 3 governments since the constitution. You know, let's not mix issues.
No, we are not mixing.
We will come here with statistics.
We are not mixing, but you saw last year, all the counties accepting, yes, we have all our monies. But you see now, at times, you know, there are like the IFMI systems, the budgets have to be approved by the assemblies. That is where you see some delays. But in terms of devolution and supporting devolution, and even in future, God willing, we are here, you'll come to see and you'll come to tell me, indeed, Duku, you are right. This government means business. This government is...
We'll take you up on that.
Absolutely. Victor, perhaps before we end, I engage you, you can take us to Eldred to engage.
Oh, yes, indeed. Good people who are following this discussion very closely. We are now joined by Mr. Reuben Kigame. Mr. Kigame is a former gubernatorial aspirant himself in Vihiga County, the county he comes from, where he sings very passionately Sweet Bunyore and so on. And Mr. Kigame is also, most recently, a presidential aspirant in the previous election, the election that just ended a year and a half ago. Karibu sana, Mr. Kigame. I hope you've been following our discussion. What have you got to say concerning this, what we're discussing as a stalemate between all the players on the revenue sharing? Mr. Kigame, over to you.
Yeah, if you can hear me, I missed the first part of the discussion, but I would like to say every time we have discussions such as these, what is always lacking is the principle that drives that discussion. We can go round and round and, do our blame games and say this county is not getting this and the other one. But what is the principle? What is it that we are trying to do and how are we approaching it? When I look at all the allocations, especially in the 2023-24 financial year allocations, I just see figures and I also see titles to those figures in terms of national allocations. A lot of them very ambiguous, very, very ambiguous. If you are told, for example, that you're going to spend 105.4 billion on environmental protection, water, and natural resources. If you don't have a scientific way of measuring what those components of that allocation are, that would just be an allocation. When you're told that you'll have 82.1 billion on equity, poverty reduction, women and youth empowerment, what is that? So you need to be able to ask the question, how did we get to that particular allocation? And here's one other ambiguous one, 38.2, social protection and affirmative action. So you have all these terminologies, and it's just the same way with our ministries. So by the time we come to the counties also follow suit. They do allocations because there is money available or there is a particular figure. And so we'll always fight over, this is not enough, this county is getting this, we are not getting. So I'll go back to the drawing board and ask, for who are we making this budget? Because every time we make the budget for the politicians, we make the budget for, the people in government. In fact, like this particular government, you create ministries and offices to spend money. Not on need basis. So you just keep increasing. So when you establish an office like that of the chief prime minister, the chief, the chief minister like Musalia, it's not in the constitution. So, but you allocate money to it. So you end up spending without a principle. The second thing is this, that we have, certain departments spending so much money. So you see a department like education allocated like 628.6 billion, provide quality education, outcomes and so on. Now, all of that, and yet parents are paying school fees. Teachers are complaining about not being enough salaries, etc. But you've gobbled a whole 628 billion. When I was preparing to run, and I was looking at how, for example, we could have free education, I realized that with about 389.5 billion, I could actually provide free education from primary school to secondary school to undergrad, actually. The only thing I have not included there is, the expenditure on the Ministry of Education, the curriculum developers, etc. But I would say that with 200 billion less, we could more than provide free education. Now you have 628 billion and education is not free. It means that we are making these budgets for other people, not for our children, not for our parents, not for the teachers. So you end up with budgeted corruption. Now, when it comes to the equalization fund, for example, which goes to counties, you have these counties making money because, of course, they collect revenue in and of themselves. Then they're given the equalization fund, which is hardly, especially if you look at northern Kenya, northeastern, you look at Turkana, you wonder, kwani hii pesa inaenda wapi? So I would propose that we do budgeting a bit differently. First of all, our budgets should be people-centered, not politician-centered. Our budgets should be directed to the people. For example, there's no need for all these CDF, NGCDF, pay the schools directly. Don't make MPs, MCAs, benefactors, those that distribute money at will, whoever they want. We know the children that need that money, so give it to them. You can directly to the schools. When it comes to allocating money, different departments, we first of all ask, how much do we have and are we going to be able to live within our means? When you see an allocation like in the 2023-2024 financial year, and then you have a supplementary budget coming up shortly,
right?
You almost see a trigger happy government to say, okay, we have this, but we'll have another supplementary budget. What is this stuff called supplementary budget? Doesn't it mean that we don't have experts that can predict for 12 months only? It means that we are creating loopholes for reallocation and looting.
Now,
anyone who
let me jump in here for a second.
Then,
just one moment, please.
Sure.
One moment, please. So as you're proceeding, as you're making your statements, I'll tell you this. The panel here, there's a wide range of reactions and responses. Could we get some reactions before you proceed? Starting with Honorable Thuku, please.
Yes. I think our brother Ruben Kigame is one of the musicians I admire most, especially the gospel music. But now I think some of the things he's saying goes to see. You might be good in some things, but not as good in others. Because when Ruben talks about the education budget, right? It's one thing to give populist statements. It's a totally different ballgame when it comes to implementation. Even when the late Mzee Kibaki, may God rest his soul in peace, brought the free primary education, people will still tell you they had to chip in here and there. You see, in terms of resources. There is no way, when he says that the budget for the education ministry, it should not be the way it is. He says he's a Kenyan. If he believes that money is going to the wrong uses, he can resort to court action. But it's not good to come on national TV and mislead people on such an issue. When he talks about MPs, MCAs, and other leaders, not reading in the distribution of resources in this country, again, he misses the point. Because if this money goes directly to the people there, and even their representatives may not even know what has gone where. That is why, for example, in CDF, the MPs are not the primary users. They are just patrons. In these world funds and other funds going to the wards, it is not the MCAs who are dispensing them. We have our role, but we are there in the mix.
So what's your point?
My point is, you cannot remove leaders from the administering of the public funds, right? That will not bring about any positive development. Leaders, and this has been the tradition in this country since independence, have to take a lead role, such that in the area I'm leading, if I feel there are no proper resources, or there is no fairness in the distribution of resources in my area, I'm the one to go to the county assembly, I'm the one to approach the governor, I'm the one to petition even the national government that I think my area is being discriminated about.
Fair enough.
Therefore, my brother Ruben, with all due respect, on those two fronts.
You think he's misguided?
Yes.
All right, fair enough. You know, you're in trouble when a resident lawyer is perusing through what I believe is the Constitution, the legal Bible. Hit us.
I'm just trying to balance the two now.
Right.
I see fires brewing. But I'd like to start by saying I agree with Ruben when he talks about the need for an objective criteria in terms of allocation, because that is one of the thorny issues that then creates the problems. So that if there's extreme clarity in terms of what are the parameters, because remember all of us are saying here that the conversation must be had, so that then the disparity can also be reduced. So it doesn't look like they're just abstract figures that everybody is quoting to, you know, so that the COG is not looking like they're trying to look a certain way, and Treasury is not looking stingy.
And to hook emotions.
Yes, and also then, because we do know there's quite a bit of wastage at both the national government and the county government level. But we also know that there's a significant amount of hoarding of resources. And I say this even, you see, even at the Law Society of Kenya, we have branches. And one of the things that we, for instance, I consistently push for is that we need to empower the branches. Because after all is said and done, the basic level that interacts on a daily basis with the members, in this case with the citizens, is that local level. So, and that's why I was saying, for instance, that we shouldn't overhype the executive. That is why the executive, even in terms of revenue allocation, does not, its role comes later. That's why we have the CRA that will go around the counties. So even when the president speaks, his mandate is not the one that goes to interact on a daily basis with the counties to understand those specific concerns. So I agree with Ruben, an objective criteria is extremely important, but more important is transparency in terms of that, how the objective criteria is arrived at, so that then, you remember even when we were talking about a few years ago, the question of, are we talking about, and again, he points out very correctly, that resources, they don't go to tables, they go to human beings. So when you're talking about allocation of resources, it should be, you know, we have regions, for instance, that when you're looking at how much children are getting as bursaries, sometimes you find children are getting 4,000 in certain regions, only to find other regions where people are getting 100,000. So that's not a fair allocation, you see? So when you're talking about this allocation of resources, it must be extremely objective. We must do it, as Ruben is saying, with the appreciation that the resources should be able to serve the people on the ground. But again, even as we're doing that, one of the things that must be at the very back of our minds is that we shouldn't kill devolution. It is intended truly to bring the services to the basic level, so that the government, the executive can only know so much about what is happening every day at a specific county. But then we have, for instance, the MCAs, whose we expect that they are able to interact with the people at the most basic level. So we need to have that at the back of our minds, so that even as national government is allocating the, you know, as Treasury is releasing the funds, all right, pursuant to Senate's determination, it shouldn't do it in a manner that looks as if they're giving them, the drip, as if it's a favor, or as if it's just small pieces, as if it's a carrot and stick kind of scenario. Let's make sure that we are not killing devolution in that sense. And to that extent, I agree with Ruben.
Fair enough. John,
two quick ones.
You have 2 pages of notes.
So 2 quick ones. The first one, I think there's an appreciation which I want to take from what Ruben has said on the value of having a budget and a process of coming up with a budget that is very reflective of the voices and needs of citizens. I think that for me is really central, even to why we devolved, right? So we devolved because we wanted to deal with marginalization, but secondly, we wanted to make sure that citizens were right at the center of making decisions about all these resources we are talking about that come close to the citizens. The definition of that voice of resources is where it gets a little bit gray, right? So it's a question of, does it mean that we still have the mentality of, oh, no, so citizens can be spoken for? Or is it the case that as we go throughout the process, remember our budgeting process, when you look from when we start formulating it to when we audit it, is almost 2.5 years long. And along it, there are all manner of decisions that we are making that feed into each other. So how much do we see citizens' priorities reflecting in those budgets? How responsive are the government agencies? And here I speak, are the budgeting agencies in government? And here I speak of the executive and the assembly as well. So I think there's something to appreciate on what that responsiveness to citizen voices should be. And there should be no moment when we think that these processes are too technical for citizens, because that's something that sometimes you hear. Any citizen, whether they are somewhere in Lokichar or they are right at the center of Nairobi, actually can engage with that process. So I want to agree with that aspect. The second one is related to the issue of, which also Ruben touched on, which is this separation of powers when it comes to the budget, and Honorable Thuko has also spoken to it. Now, if you remember the CDF, it has been on a 10-year case process in the courts, all the way to the Supreme Court. And there was a big discussion about that because there was a point to be made about where the oversight starts, where it stops, and where the implementation starts, and who should oversight the implementation. And you know, sometimes this runs into very interesting conflict of interest scenarios. Let me give a very good example of CDF. CDF today, the CDF Act that was passed in 2015, as MPs made sure they ran away quickly from that money being taken to counties.
Right.
The amendment they made means that CDF today is calculated as a percentage of the equitable share that remains with the national government. So the stalemate we are talking about. So when the division of revenue goes to the National Assembly, it is in the interest of MPs that the share of the money that remains with the national government is very big, because the bigger it is, the bigger the proportion of CDF, right? So it actually gets us into very interesting conflict of interest in these discussions. And I think, you know, when we are speaking about these funds, especially those that are, because now you have the women reps have the affirmative action fund. Senators, I hear, they also now have a fund. MPs have a fund. MCAs, they don't have a fund. You know, when you go to county budgets.
But they want one.
No, they have something. But it's not called a ward. When you go to county budgets.
Some counties
they call it
ward development funds as a result of local legislation.
Local arrangement.
Is local arrangement.
Local arrangement.
Right. Oh, like
if you go to the budget, they are called ward projects. They have names that are not.
They are called specific
ward projects.
Gray areas.
Gray areas.
No, they are not. They are there.
But I want to kind of add to the point Ruben was making, that the separation of powers is not just abstract. And the CDF example for me is one of how such scenarios can actually get us into a very dicey situation.
I see.
So that's something I wanted to contribute on the aspect of the separation of powers.
Brilliant.
Victor, George,
So
let's
Can I just say something?
to chime in. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to say something before. We allow Ruben? Yeah. All right.
Ruben, proceed.
Yeah, you people have talked for an hour. Please give me time to talk. So,
you have the floor, Ruben.
The first thing is this, gentleman and lady.
Yes.
If you're going to budget for agriculture, how much food the Kenyan people will eat, you first of all ask, how many bags are they going to eat in a year? So then you ask, how much it costs to produce one bag, so that every time you're budgeting for food production, it is commensurate to, you measure it against the need. You just don't go into importing fertilizer, how many tractors, and you are leasing ground to do. You really must peg it on a scientific measurement. Otherwise, you'll go into wastage. I wish I could sing to my brother who thinks I'm a good musician, but a horrible thinker. I wish I could sing for you this, that if I was to use capitation for every primary school child, 2023-2024, at 15,000 Kenya shillings, I would spend 157.5 billion to give free education to primary schools. If I spent 30,000 on every secondary going student, I would spend 271.5 billion to give free education. If I gave every university student 210,000, I would be spending 118 billion to give those undergrads free education. That would come to a total of 389.5 billion. So I'm not cooking up figures. And I've used the private sector to be able to quantify what I'm giving you. So I'm saying, when you spend 628 billion and education is not free, and I can give it for 389.5, what do you want me to sing for you? It means we are wasting a lot. So I said you could top up with TSC, with the curriculum developers, you could, Ministry of Education, do whatever you want. But if education is people-centered, first of all, if you provide free education, then you free parents from selling land and cars and cows to educate their children for 1 year. They need 4 years. But if you free them that way, then they pump into the revenue because they'll have, ground to dig, farms to dig. They will have resources to produce. Then you can tax them, and it will come back to you. That is where I'm coming from. But secondly, I would like to really say this, that every time we make a budget and then allow, whether it's the executive or parliament, to keep altering it without, a scientific measurement of why the alterations are made, we end up with graft. So, for example, if you just say last year we raised 2 billion or 2.1, 2.3 billion shillings, therefore let's spend it. You're making a mistake because you would need to come backwards and say, this is what we have. What can we cut back? What can we leave out of the budget? When you go to your own house, you live within your means. When it comes to government, we have money to spend, so we ask, what else can we spend it on? But I'll make one last point and then hand it back to you and say, even the way we budget, we don't budget for the Kenyan people because, for example, why would you have an expressway in Nairobi and yet more people walk in Nairobi? They walk to work. So we need to budget for the public spaces, not those who drive, the few people that drive. So we should be budgeting for public transport, for this light rail that can transport people quickly so that even people can leave their cars at home. So if Nairobi is coming to 6 million people and all you can do is crowd them there, you haven't even gotten to the housing conditions and so on. I've been to Kibera, Korogosho, I've been to Mathare, I've been to Mukuru. Just understand, what is the point of a man and woman and 5 children living in a single room? That is not dignity, even if you talked about building houses. And then this building of houses is discussed at conference tables. So that you budget for stone houses, even for Mandera, where, you just need tents. So you need a different way of building houses. So this round table budgeting and the trigger happy spending culture that can see you say we need to cut back, but you are busy spending on traveling and so on. All of us know that this particular government is speaking from one side of the mouth, let us stop embezzlement. And on the other side, they're spending like crazy, traveling like crazy. Why would we be working on dealing with environmental management, and yet we are spending so much on fuel guzzlers to emit more? So how do we deal with the environment?
Right.
While we're destroying it. So yes. I'm basically saying we have gone insane. And I wish I could sing it to you, sir. I wish I could sing it to you that the work of a legislator is not to distribute money.
Okay.
It's to make laws and ensure that the people they represent are taken care of. Right now, the executive is captured, has captured the legislature. They will pass whatever they want to pass. And I'm saying that's the wrong way to go.
Thank you so much.
And so I'm here to tell you that that's the wrong way to do government.
Okay.
If I could say, if I had nothing else to say, I would say you're doing government wrong. You need to do it right.
And what a way to, listen to the remarks by Reuben Kigame, because unfortunately we have run out of time. Our guests here in studio are really itching to actually respond to Reuben, but we are really time-bound, Mheshimiwa.
Just one word.
One word.
Yeah, because I wanted to tell Reuben I wasn't saying that he is a horrible thinker, but the thing is, Reuben is a good man, he's a good musician, but definitely he's wrong on some aspects when he talks about expressway. And we have seen all the jams in these roads.
Let's not get the details.
Yeah, we will not go get the details.
I have an idea.
But then one last word.
Mr. Thuku, how about this? How about this? Let's organize another show.
Yeah, but one last word. Let everyone know, and even I want this panel to be informed. The days of politics, of rhetoric have ended. That's why you find the governors have a kitty, the senators have a kitty.
We really have to.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I appreciate you. I appreciate. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
for your passion. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for your comments. Harriet, thank you for coming.
Well, I have to say something before we end.
Wish you the best.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to say that even from the discussion today, it is important for the Law Society of Kenya to get a president who believes in independence of institutions and also in strengthening of devolution. Those are two things that I truly stand for, as you have seen. Therefore, they should vote for me
on 29. Are you giving us campaign money?
All right. And John, no, for me to say thanks, I think is to appreciate the fact that this conversation is happening and to always remind Kenyans that whenever we are having these discussions about where the money is going and what have you, always to keep the nuance of where we are as a country, because that would always give us a sense of where things are going. Thank you.
Fair enough.
Reuben Kigame, a second to you, please. You get the final word.
Parting shot.
We've lost.
Well, I can take his minute. Please remember to vote for me on 29th of February, LSK President. Thank you very much.
Do we have Reuben? Okay, brilliant. That's why we wind up the show tonight. John Kinuthia, thank you so much for joining us. Senior Programs Officer, International Budget Partnership Kenya. Harriet Mjoki-Mboshe, Presidential Candidate and Council Member, LSK. All the best in the elections, as well as Mheshimiwa Kiruga Vuku, MCA, Chinga Ward and UDA, and NEC Member and Chairperson, UDA MCA's Caucus, as well as Reuben Kigame, former presidential aspirant. My name is George Maringa. Of course, I've been driving the show with
Victor Muyakane.
We want to wish you a wonderful night and thank you so much for watching the Daily Report. That's where we wind up. As always, stay safe and be kind to one another. We'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Good night, good day, God bless you.
Thank you.